we are having, looking at economic policy, economic concepts in ancient India. I've always wondered how come we were the richest country on the planet for thousands of years. What were the economic principles? It is very good fortune of ours. We have two eminent speakers. One of them, of course, Dr. Panchamukhi, who has worked for nearly, I would say, 60 odd years in this economic field. And then we have a very young professor, Professor Deodhar. To chair the session today, we have Dr. Arvind Virmani. Arvind Virmani is the chairman of Egrow Foundation. Dr. Virmani has published extensively articles and books in refereed journals. And the most important thing is he has played a very prominent role in policy making. And as you know, Egrow Foundation is a research-based policy think tank, and we believe in looking at contemporary issues and providing policy inputs based on research. Dr. Virmani has worked a number of years in the Planning Commission. He has also worked as executive director at the International Monetary Fund, and before that, he was the chief economist or chief economic advisor, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. With this, we hand over to Dr. Virmani to conduct the proceedings. Dr. Virmani, please.
Thank you, Charan. So our first speaker is Dr. Vr Panchmukhi. I've known him for a long, long time. But let me briefly introduce him to people who may not be familiar with him. He is an economist and Sanskrit scholar also. He has done pioneering work on the application of game theory to international trade policy and analysis, and had a significant impact on trade policy regimes in the 60s and 70s. He has worked on development models and resource gaps for the countries of ESCAP with Nobel laureate Tinbergen. I recall my association with him as I think I first met him when he as founder director general of the RIS. It's probably the first time we met. And of course, he has also been chairman of the ICSSR, managing editor of the Indian Economic Journal, and Indian Economic Association managing trustee. With that, let me hand it over to you, Professor Panchamukhi. It's a pleasure, and I look forward to this getting educated on the topic of today's discussion. I'll introduce the second speaker later. I think we have about 40-45 minutes. Will that be enough for you?
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, Professor, good to have you back. Looking forward to your talk.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Virmani. The same with me. I have. Is it resounding now? I have also known you for several years in different capacities, and I have the pleasure of intimately knowing your work, and I have great regard for you when you were working as Chief Economic Advisor in the Ministry of Finance. You have made impacts on the policy making and analytical thinking in the country. I have known Dr. Charan Singh as a great
Sir, sorry to interrupt. Sir, can you lower the volume of your phone? There is a echoing because sound is coming from both your desktop and phone.
So then I can.
Sir, mute your phone completely using volume buttons. Sir, keep your video on. Just lower the volume of your phone. Sir,
Hello.
You are audible, sir. Hello.
Audible. Audible.
Okay.
I'm making the sound from the cell phone almost zero.
This is wonderful now.
Okay. It's much better. Okay, thank you. Let me move fast. You know, the topic given by Dr. Virmani and Dr. Charan Singh was that economic planning in ancient India. But I suggested that we put it as a more general, generic topic as ancient Indian thoughts on development and management. And of course, economic planning becomes part of that system. Economic planning is nothing but managing the resources. You know, planning is nothing but managing the resources. So managing the resources will have to be properly understood. Now, I present my things to be very cryptic in a manner which compares the modern economic thoughts with the ancient Indian thoughts. I call it as Western economics. Next slide, please. Are you able to hear? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
I'm thankful to Dr. Charan Singh, Dr. Virmani, and all of you for presenting yourselves for this. Next one. Yeah. You know, we make a distinction between scientific age and knowledge society. These days, it is a fashion to call that we are a knowledge society, and we are the first time we are entering into a knowledge society. I refute that argument by saying that India has had several knowledge epochs of scientific age and knowledge society. When Kanada discovered that the matter is made from atoms, or Panini discovered the linguistics and argued that there is a phonetic basis for all words, and the grammar is very profound. All these were knowledge societies, very profound knowledge societies. When Bhaskaracharya discovered mathematics and astronomy, and Aryabhatta discovered astronomy, there were scientific ages. There were fundamental scientific ages. So to say that we are now into knowledge society is not necessarily very correct. One next one, please. So if we'll have to understand the ancient Indian thoughts, we should have a pride for heritage. You know, pride for heritage is the basis for all nation building. Without any understanding of our roots, we will not be able to grow. It's said that some studies have shown that the so-called industrial revolution of Europe was because Europe started looking into its roots, to fundamental roots, Roman civilization and others. And similarly, Chinese development was due to its commitment to Confucianism, and Japanese also to it. So there are many instances where development takes place out of our commitment to recognize our ancient wisdom and heritage. You know, the Swabhiman is something which is required. Drohankar is not required. Drohankar is a negative force, but Swabhiman is very much required. We must not negate. The process of negating our own heritage and our own ancient wisdom and knowledge system started with Macaulay. Macaulay, as you know, created a thesis that if we have to make Indians with Indian body, he's quoted as saying that. So pride one's next one. So one has to view this nation building and national pride as synonymous. And we have lost the race in nation building because we lost our pride for heritage for a long time, not only during the British rule, but also during part of our independent India. We have to, I would not go into the political systems, but I feel unless we develop our basis for pride for our own knowledge system. And Swadharme Nidhanam Sreyaha, paradharmo bhayapaha. That's what Lord Krishna says in Arjuna. Next one. I will go quickly. I have the last few slides. Fundamental things for resource management.
आगे है
क्या होगा? So basic purpose of education and knowledge. The ancient Indian wisdom stated that knowledge and education have to aim at creating a man without any prejudices. Sa vidya ya vimuktai. We had such fundamental principles of knowledge, resource management, economic thinking, and ethics and morality that we have forgotten. And since we have to reinterpret all these statements in the modern jargons, Sa vidya ya vimuktai. Vimuktai means freedom from all prejudices. The world today is having prejudices in the education system, in the administration system, in the management system, everywhere we have prejudices. Objectivity is less. Unless we create an education system which creates objective and morally sound students, not just educated people, but wise people, not just informed people, but wise people. Jnanam Vijnana Sahitam Yajnatva Mokshase Chubhat. So knowledge of the material world combined with the deeper knowledge of its fundamentals, that is Vijnanam. The knowledge and the education were considered to be both in the materialistic system and in the spiritual system. The word spiritual also has been totally misinterpreted in present times. It means spiritual means religious, spiritual means ritualistic, spiritual means lot of negativity. That's not so. Spiritual in the ancient Indian system, as per our Vedic tradition and Vedic knowledge and wisdom system, was to give importance to the values, not just the material world. Later on, I will come how man has to be viewed as a holistic man, materialistic man. Next one, materialistic man and the holistic and a spiritual man. And unless we have these two properly blended, we will not be able to understand the system around us. Holistic man is the blend of materialism and spiritualism. And spiritualism is again stands for values and lots of norms of life, unless you have. Later on, I talk about gross domestic welfare product, not just gross domestic product, gross material. Next one. Now, gross material product is only consistent. Next slide, please. So, holistic approach to knowledge, jnana vijnana triptatma, kutastho vijitendriyaha, yukta ityutyate yogi, samalotthasma kanchanaha. There is a separation of knowledge and the knower. Knower, knowledge seeker, and the knowledge holder. Knowledge holder will have to have certain qualities. Our graduates, postgraduates, PhDs, our professors will have to have certain attributes. Then only they become knowledgeable people. Otherwise, they would only have the knowledge, not wise people. The type of knowledge and the attributes of the knowledge seeker, knowledge holder, have to be properly knowledge. I call it as knowledge personality. Knowledge personality will have to have, as stated in the Bhagavad Gita, Jnana Vijnana Triptatma, Kutastho Vijitendriyaha, Yukta Ityuchate Yogi, Samalotthasma Kanchanaha. He should have equanimity in respect of material wealth and spiritual possessions. He should have this equanimity in distributing the wealth, knowledge wealth among all the people. Next one. Therefore, the knowledge and knowledge holder will have to be properly understood. And all these are very well narrated in the Bhagavad Gita. I quote many times because Bhagavad Gita is a treatise on human behavior. Bhagavad Gita is not just a treatise for moksha, not a treatise for salvation, as is wrongly understood and presented by the traditional people. Traditional people have presented a very narrow view of Bhagavad Gita, whereas Bhagavad Gita has been a treatise on human behavior, on human psychology, on more than anything else on managing oneself. The traditional wisdom of India emphasized more on managing oneself, whereas Peter Drucker and company tell you more about managing others, managing raw material, managing wealth, managing capital, managing the ministers, managing the competitors. So all that is possible, all that is not possible unless we know how to manage oneself. Next one, please. Therefore, managing oneself is something which is fundamental to our ancient Indian wisdom. That is why emphasis was on individual purity, individual values, and individual commitment to norms, social welfare. And I make a distinction in this context between information, knowledge, and wisdom. We are creating an information society where computers are providing lots of millions of bits of information. And to convert that into knowledge, we need expertise. You need proper training. But to convert that knowledge into wisdom, you need the spiritual foundations of life. The fundamental approach to seeking information, knowledge, and wisdom are the sense organs, the Indriyas, mind, and buddhi. The entire Bhagavad Gita is based upon the interaction, the principles of interaction between sense organs, mind, and buddhi. I can't help to be jargonistic because the time is short. I have to be jargonistic and I have to be jargonistic in presenting these Indriya, Manas, and Buddhi, means sense organs. Mind is a storehouse of thoughts. Mind is a storehouse of emotions. Mind is a storehouse of all attitudes and aptitudes. And the entire Kurukshetra is not in Kurukshetra in Haryana, but it is the mind itself. The entire Bhagavad Gita is a treatise on managing one's own mind. And knowledge or buddhi is considered to be intellect, gives you the power of reasoning. And power of reasoning is based upon the wisdom. And therefore, the sense organs, next one, sense organs get in touch with the outside world. The mind becomes a storehouse of various thoughts and attitudes and aptitudes, and buddhi comes to the rescue of these conflicting thoughts. So entire Bhagavad Gita starts with Dhritarashtra asking question to Sanjaya. Dhritarashtra is a born blind person, but we are all blind even having our eyes because we have no proper reasoning power. We have no proper ability to discriminate the right from the wrong. And he asks the question to Sanjaya. Sanjaya is Samyak Jayati iti Sanjaya. I will have to give the Sanskrit etymologies. Sanjayati. In our organs of knowledge acquisition, we have got something called Sakshi, that is the conscience. The conscience is always the keeper of the truth. Conscience always touches upon the basic fundamental truths. And therefore, Dhritarashtra asks the question to conscience. When there is conflict between my, that is Ahankara, and Pandava, who stand for values and noble thoughts, how is the matter to be settled? It has to be settled by referring to the inner messages of conscience. That is how Bhagavad Gita begins as a treatise on human psychology. Next one, please. And I will have to run through these slides very quickly. Now I will make a distinction between modern economic thoughts and social economic thoughts. I will have to be crisp and telegraphic in my presentation, but I hope you will get the hints of what I am trying to say. Indian classical social science thoughts and Western social science thoughts. I do call the modern social science thoughts as Western because we are all taught for several decades about Karl Marx, about Arrow, about Adam Smith, and all this, as if they are the fathers of the social science process. Kautilya was the father. Kautilya was in the 5th, 6th century BC, and he provides a classic which is again in different jargons, in different terminology, and we have to reinterpret Kautilya in the proper perspective.
Kautilya says, gives a very holistic and multidisciplinary model of human welfare. He says, Sukhasya moolam dharma, dharmasya moolam arthaha, arthasya moolam rajyam, rajyasya moolam indriyajayaha, indriyajayasya moolam vinayah, vinayasya moolam vruddhopaseva, vruddhopasevayaha moolam vijnanam, vijnanena atmanam vindet. It's a highly profound multidisciplinary model of human welfare. It will be beating even the Arrow's model of welfare or Arthur Sain's models of welfare. It gives, but the fundamental factor here, the fundamental point to be noted here is Sukhasya Moolam Dharma. It says that the fundamental determinant of happiness in life is Dharma. Dharma is wrongly interpreted in the modern world. Dharma is considered as rituals, Dharma is religion, Dharma is a dividing force. That is why we try to create a Dharma Nirapeksha society. We try to create a Dharma Nirapeksha society, and in that process we lost the values also. Dharma is not a dividing force. Dharma stands for Dhriyate Adhapatan Purushaha Anena iti Dharma. Dharanat Dharma Uchyate. Dharma is value system. Dharma is a system of do's and don'ts which keep you on a path of morality and principles of ethics. Therefore, Dharma is not something to be shunned, but Dharma has to be encouraged. Next para. In the context of Dharma Nirapeksha society, therefore, the entire concepts like development, welfare, management, all these need to be redefined. Development does not mean only growth of GDP or NNP or NDP, but it has to be next one. And similarly, next one, please. So then I will consider the distinction between the ICSST and WSST in terms of the goals of behavior, determinants of activities, concepts of national welfare, attitude towards consumption and saving, rights versus duties and labor market, values and principles of development and management, classification of assets. The last one is going to give you how to manage the resources, lifestyles and resource balance, an integrated model of human happiness. Next one, please. The next one. So nature of the entity of, so the fundamental difference between the two sources of knowledge, two sources of analysis, two sources of understanding the world arises because the Western economic science consider man as an economic man, there too rational economic man. You look to any encyclopedia, rational economic man always tries to maximize the economic benefits, consumption or human utility, maybe material utility or foreign exchange earnings or profits. But the Indian economic thought presents, classical social science thought presents holistic man, which again is a combination of both materialism and spiritualism. Next one, please. Next one. So therefore, the Western science emphasized on self-interest expressed in the form of profits, etc., whereas Indian classical social science thoughts has a fourfold multidisciplinary goals of life. Goals of life does not mean the end goals, but they are to be viewed in every activity. Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. I'm sure Deodhar will endorse me when I say Dharma does not mean only the religion or the ritual, but it means some ethical codes of conduct and values. Next one, please. And Artha is, of course, capital formation. Kama would mean consumption and basic needs. Today, the world is suffering from the mistaken priority on consumption. We are creating a consumerist society. Of course, I am also victim to it by purchasing so many things from Amazon, wanted or unwanted. But the fundamental difference between having a consumerist society and a society where restraint on self-consumption is kept at the core. We try to maximize consumption, but we don't maximize the consumption of the whole. We maximize the consumption of the individual. Therefore, Kama should not mean only consumption of the self, but it should be consumption of the whole. We should have the objective of distributing the consumer to more people, and therefore it has to be a basic needs consumption rather than consumption of luxury, and not exactly luxury, we should not use the word luxury, but consumption beyond the requirements of the present. Then moksha, again, I have a very interesting, very fundamental definition of moksha. The traditionalist scholars giving discourses in temples and so on keep on saying moksha is something salvation. It takes you to the near God at the end of all the series of births and deaths. But no, moksha is there in every walk of life. Moksha would mean freedom from prejudices, freedom from narrow perspectives of life. Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, Matsara. I will not elaborate. If we are getting to a situation where these are gradually eliminated, we are moving towards moksha. And moksha is the symbol of efficiency. Moksha is going near God. God is an icon of highest efficiency, highest perfection. So if I go near God means I am achieving highest efficiency. So moksha stands for freedom from prejudices, which help you to realize your full potential, and also it helps you to go near the highest efficiency. And if I say that at the end of my lecture, I have realized moksha, that means I have done my lecture in a perfect way, in the most efficient manner. Because God is the symbol in Bhagavad Gita, in Vibhuti Yoga. God is considered to be in the highest, most perfect, most illustrious objects. Among the nakshatras, Chandra is considered to be the Vibhuti, because Chandra is the most powerful person, most shining person. So same way, God is nothing but, so moksha has been wrongly interpreted by the traditionalists as going near God at the end of series of births and deaths. But I say moksha in every situation is possible. Next one. And therefore, we have to take these into account. Managing dilemmas, I will skip all these. In Bhagavad Gita, there are two types of models of manager. One is Krishna, three types. One is Krishna, another is Arjuna, and third is Duryodhana. Arjuna consults Krishna, whereas Duryodhana does not consult anybody. He takes his own decisions. Next one, please. Next one. We skip over, run over these very quickly. And dilemmas, as I said, create the conflict, the Kurukshetra in the mind. And when you realize that your buddhi has not come to your rescue to give the right reasoning, to decide upon the right decision, you'll have to go to Krishna. And Krishna uses the method, various methods to motivate Krishna, Arjuna. Arjuna is considered to be Vishada. Vishada is nothing but it comes out of the moha. Next para, next one. It comes out of the misunderstandings, misunderstandings which in every walk of life. Our depressions in management arise because we have certainly misunderstood our staff, our people. We have misunderstood the nature of the challenge, nature of the work, nature of the options before us. Therefore, we have to clear ourselves with these misconceptions before we move towards the highest Pareto optimal frontier of production, function, or welfare. And therefore, for getting out of the distress situations, Bhagavad Gita preaches you to use Dhyana Yoga. The entire sixth canto, next para, next one please. The entire sixth canto gives you the principles of Dhyana Yoga. And Krishna is a typical example of how to deal with a depressed person. He first rebukes Arjuna. Hutasva kasmalamidam vishame samupasthitam anarya duftam asvargam akirtikaram Arjuna. But he does not go to the extent of rebuking Krishna too much. He says that you are Arjuna. Arjuna means a white person a person who does not do wrong things. And therefore, Krishna props him up by saying, calling him as Arjuna, and brings in a little hasya in it by saying, Klebhyam Masmagama Partha. So in dealing with a depressed person, these are 4 or 5 stages of treatment. A psychologist, a psychiatrist, as I mentioned, Bhagavad Gita is a treatise on human psychology. It says how to deal with these. These detailed, typical tips are given in Bhagavad Gita, and we have to only unearth them. That is why Bhagavad Gita has been appealing to a large number of people. And then he calls him as Parantapa. He calls him as Arjuna, Partha, and Parantapa. 3 different modalities of addressing him. Arjuna means white person, very clear, blemishless person. Partha is a name of Kunti Putra. That is a very affectionate way. Naitattvaya Upapadyate. He gives him advice. And Parantapa is like Vivekananda's awake, arise and conquer. That kind of. So these 2 slokas, 2, 3 slokas give us how to deal with a depressed person. You may wonder, why should we bother Bhagavad Gita being a treatise on human psychology? It is so. It is there for giving you optimum behavior. I will go to the next one, please. And next one. There are also many attributes of leadership. Yajjadacharate sreshtaha, tattadevetaro janaha, sayat pramanam kurute, lokastadanu vartate, name parthasti kartavyam, trishu lokeshu kinchana, nana vaptama vaptavyam, Krishna says, I have nothing to achieve in life. I have nothing to gain or lose because I am a perfect person. I am all aptakama. And but still I do because the others follow me. That is why the leader will have to be one who sets examples by his own actions. Next one, please. By principles of performance. So these are various elements that come. Next one. Now, more emphatic difference between the modern social science and the Western, the Indian social science is the distinction between duties and functions. Duties are important. In the next one, next one. Duty is always important. Next one. Next one, please. So unless we go to the emphasis on duties, today the world is suffering from the lack of attention to duties. The Bhagavad Gita tells us there are 2 ways of doing any action: sakama karma, nishkama karma. Sakama karma means doing work with certain objectives in mind, certain goals in mind. Most of our works of ministers, of managers, of teachers, of myself, everybody is sakama karma. We always have a desire, a goal in mind, a materialistic goal. But nishkama karma means doing work without any excessive obsession about rewards. It does not say it should not be rewards, but it should be excessive obsession about reward should not be there. Today we are wanting to have not nishkama karma, but nishkarma kama. That means without doing anything, we have to realize all our goals. That has really ruined the entire work culture of the society, work culture at the individual level. So this fundamental difference between managing oneself in the Indian method is to give emphasis on the work, on the duty. Next paragraph. Karmanye madhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phalaheturbuhu madhya sangostu. I define a theory of activity which is again given in Bhagavad Gita. Adhishthanam tatha karta karanancha prathikvidam vividhacha prathikcheshta daivan chaivatra panchamam sharira vangmanobhirdit karma prarabhate naraha nyayam va viparitam va panchayate tasya hetavah. Very fundamental 5 determinants which are not there in any theory of activity. In the Koopman's theory of activity or Leontief's input-output table, we are only taking the material aspects. Whereas here, the material aspects are taken first in the contextual setting, initial conditions, understand? But the next one is most important, attributes of karta, the doer, the performer. The performer in the sense of not just labor, but labor along with his attitudes, which is aptitudes. If you produce a doctor who is not willing to serve the poor in the villages, if you produce a manager who is not willing to work for the welfare of the corporate sector as a whole, you are not having. So attributes are more important in Karta. There is to cut short the time, I give the definition of Satvika Karta. All the things in life are classified as Satvika, Rajasa, and Tamasa. Very beautiful classification of our food, our activities, our donations, our tapas. Everything is done in threefold category to give us a practical tips as to how we should be most efficient in life. The Satvika Karta is beautifully defined. Maybe we can use these conditions, necessary and sufficient conditions, to give advertisement for most efficient manager required. Mukta Sango Anahamwadi, Jityutsaha Samanvitaha, Siddha Siddho Nirvikaraha, Karta Satvika Uchate. One who does not have great passion for everything. That means he does not have passion in the sense, not attachment, that it is mine, I must earn it myself. No, it should be for the society, for the world as a whole. Anahamwadi, he should never say, I did it, I do it. As the Japanese industrial culture says, 3 C's, commitment, consistency, and competence. The same thing is stated in yoga. Yoga karmasu kaushalam. Then we have got Muktada Anamvad, Dhrityutsaha Samanvitaha. He should have the courage and the enthusiasm to innovate and do new things. And Siddha Siddhyo Nirvikaraha. He should be unattached with achievements, or elation should not be there, and depression should not be there. This is the necessary and sufficient condition for a manager to be most efficient. Next one, please. And that is why the basic determinants are national welfare. As I said earlier, gross national welfare is gross material welfare, gross values product. And you may ask the question as to how I measure the values product. You know, at one time, temperature was also not possible to be measured. It was considered that temperature is immeasurable. But later on, we have got all the methods of measuring temperature. Similarly, values product, we will have to have a method of holistic method of treating that. And next para, next one, please. And now I come to the final stage because time is running out. Towards consumption and saving, as I said earlier, there has to be a proper restraint on self-consumption. Excessive consumerism is the cause for the entire global warming, the environmental pollution, and all sorts of imbalances in the world, in the mankind as a whole. Therefore, the restraint on self-consumption, which is the basic principle of life according to the ancient Indian wisdom, has to be emphasized. Next para. This may appear utopian because we have moved away from these, next one please, from these models, and therefore we have come to a situation. Duties in labor I have already spoken. Next para, next one. Next one please. Next one quickly. Right, next one please. Yeah. Yeah, principles of values of development, value of contentment, value of cooperation, value of caring and compassion, next para. These are all missing in our system. In the so-called competitive world, we try to destroy everyone. Next one. Next slide, please. Destroy everyone and not care for compassion. Cooperative movement of Mahatma Gandhi, cooperative movement of Vinoba Bhave. Next one, please. Are the most fundamental approaches. Commitment, consistency, and competence. Principles of managing oneself before managing others. And using trust, faith as a guiding principle. Principle to knowledge and wisdom, the primacy. Unbiased and objective. Being Shrestha to become a leader. Principles of independence in thinking. These are all very fundamental principles of management given in our ancient wisdom. Next para. Next one, please. Next one, please. Daivi Sampat and Asuri Sampat are given in Bhagavad Gita. Then again, these are not by the rate of return on the assets, but they are by the attributes of the owners of the assets. Abhayam Sattva Samsuddhi, Dana Yoga Vyavasthithi. A person who is having Asuri Sampat is because of the qualities, the attributes of the owner of that asset. Asset itself is not Asuri or Daivi. is not productive or unproductive. The way in which the owner makes it. If a person who is always wanting to destroy other, kill the other person, is having Asuri Sampat. I call many of the modern multinationals as Asuri Sampat, to be detested. I will not go in the elaborate on this. Next one, please. Next one. I'm running out of the time. Yeah. Now I come to the last part of my presentation where it says that lifestyles and resource balance. Next one. You know, the old system, wisdom, classified the society into 4 professions. We call it as Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. Next one, please. I conceive the entire population into 4x4 matrix. Next one, please. Now 4x4 matrix. Yeah. Suppose a society, a region, or a village has got 1 lakh population. Now they are categorized into 4 types of professions: education, health, R&D activity. They are called as Brahmin. Defense, administration, governance, they are called as Kshatriya. Production, trade and commerce, they are Vaishya. That is why, you know, they are not by birth. That is absolutely wrong to categorize them by birth, and they are to be categorized by the Guna Karma Vibhagachaha. Very clearly it is stated that, you know, when I was in Bangkok, I'm sorry, I'm running out of the time. I'm coming almost towards the end of the presentation. In Brahmin, I had met the Brahmin Rajaguru there. He said his son can become either Brahmin or join the military and become a Kshatriya. His son can join the trade and becomes a trader. So the profession, the Brahminism has been wrongly presented as the highest profession of life, but because it is stated that it has come from the head. These are only professional classification by guna and karma. So education, defense, production, service activity. Then lifestyle 1 is brahmacharya, lifestyle 2 is grahastha, lifestyle 3 is vanaprastha, lifestyle 4 is sannyasa. These were again meant for, next one please. So I have given a configuration of 1 lakh population into this 4x4 matrix, those who understand. So lifestyle 1 is, I take 2 basic parameters of behavior. One is average propensity for resource utilization. He puts the claim on resources. Then another is average propensity to resource regeneration. Everyone contributes to the regeneration of resources or resource utilization. Lifestyle 1, when you are in brahmacharya, you have very low APRU and very low APRR. So grahastha, he has got high APRU, average propensity of resource utilization, and high average propensity of resource regeneration. Similarly, lifestyle 3, medium APRU and medium APRR. I will not elaborate on them. Very low APRU in the sannyasasrama and medium APRR. In the sannyasasrama and vanaprasthasrama, you are supposed to contribute to the value product, material welfare, and next one. And I take these some numerical examples of these propensities. Average propensity for resource utilization is 200 rupees worth in the category of Brahmin and Brahmacharya, education, health. Then 600 in the lifestyle. I have taken according to that categorization these different average propensities. Next one, please. The next one. Similarly, resource utilization, resource regeneration activity. Artificial numbers I have given to say it's a totally different model of resource management, not the model of allocation over the sectors and putting tax on the system and so on. Next one, please. And so if you have these for the 1,000 population, model 1, next one, please. So by this, by multiplying the average propensities of resource utilization and resource regeneration, you get claim on resources and contribution to resources by different professional groups. And then the resource balance is taken, and the model of configuration of the population, as we saw in the first instance, gives you a surplus of 2 lakh rupees worth. Next one. Now, if we get the population growth by about 20%, no, 2%, and then you get 1 lakh, next one, please. 1,20,000. as the next population, and its configuration slightly different from the earlier one. People move from lifestyle 1 to lifestyle 2, or from education, health to defense, and their propensities remain the same. Propensities for resource utilization and propensities for resource regeneration. But the configuration of population changes. If the configuration of population changes, next one please, then we are able to get at the claim on resources and contribution to resources. I need not dwell much on the very wise audience that we have today, that by multiplying the total number of population with the average propensities, we get the resource utilization and claim on resources. Now this configuration creates us a deficit of resources of minus 13, artificial number. Next one, please. And then suppose I have one more configuration. Yeah, next one, please. Another configuration of population of 1.2 by professional. Next one. In a different manner, slightly different manner, in a different configuration. People do not move from low resource utilization to high resource utilization. They move less, and then we get into surplus situation. So the next one. So the message of this model is that you can generate overall resource deficit, resource balance, resource surplus by moving population from one configuration of resource utilization to and earlier the people used to move voluntarily from one group to the other. We see even the kings becoming sannyasis, kings reducing their claim on resources. So the entire population movement from one configuration to the other implies an impact on the overall use of resources, resource surplus or resource deficit. Therefore, now here no taxation is required. People are moving. So you have to emphasize the need for resource utilization constraint, consumerism constraint, to generate a situation of resource surplus. I hope this model is clear. You can reflect upon it. The configurations and the example is available with you, and therefore it gives you an idea how population movement leads to resource balance, not just taxation. Or so without any taxation you can generate resource surplus or resource deficit situations. Next one, please. And in this manner, next one. Yeah, so I told you already the integrated model of welfare given by Kautilya, Sukhasya Moolam Dharma. Dharmasya Moolam Artha. He says the capital required to generate a value system, and that value system which generates happiness has to be properly managed. You cannot say Sukhasya Moolam Artha. Somebody puts the value system he removed, he made Sukhasya Moolam Artha. Capital, capital, capital. If you don't have capital to repay your borrowings, borrow again. That is the message. Dhanam Kritva Dhatam Prabhid. The Charvaka method of saying that you must borrow more and live more happily on consumption. Whereas the model of ancient Indian wisdom told us about restraint on self-consumption, making more available for the society as a whole, and moving from one configuration of resource regeneration and resource claim to another in such a way that ultimately the resource balance is maintained. Rajasya Moolam Indriya Jaya. People who are at the helm of the affairs will have to be such as to have control over their sense organs. Today is the exactly opposite happening. People who become political leaders, or I don't want to say anything against them, but those who manage the resources are not having any control over their sense organs. The entire corruption system arises because we don't have the system of managing our own control, our own mind. Indriya Jayasya Moolam Vinaya. One has to have the modesty. Then Vinayasya Moolam Ruddhopaseva. You must have the ability to respect the elders, respect the scholars, respect the noble people, and then only you will have Vinaya. Ruddhopasevaya Moolam Vijnanam. You can do this only means science. Science also is an integrated reasoning power. But Vijnana here would mean Vijnanam. V means Paramatma, Vipakshi Paramatmanoh. Having the knowledge that everything is governed by Paramatma. Ishavashamidam sarvam, yatkincha jagatyam jagat, tena tyaktena bhunjitaha, magradha kasa siddhanam. Everything is governed by Paramatma, and nothing is no ownership of any resource for us. And then if you have this attitude, but everything is for the social welfare. Sarve jana sukhino bhavantu, sarve bhadrani pasyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet. These have become only quotations to be quoted in the seminars and public lectures. But these were lived actually in the ancient Indian system, and that is why we had a very prosperous society. Vijnanena Atmanam Vidhet. With this power of reasoning, we will be able to realize our own self and understand our own inner self. And that is how the integrated model of welfare of Kautilya, apart from his contributions to the taxation system, to public finance, to his human resource development, management of the governance, management of the administration, apart from these fundamental thoughts given by Kautilya in the 6th and 7th century BC, he has given very profound principles of life. Vedas are nothing but principles of life. Human philosophy of life is given, and that is how if we resurrect these principles in life of the present day, not only in India, but in the world as a whole, we will be able to produce a better society, more welfare-oriented society. Competition is good to a certain limit, but competition is not the end of all efficiency. We know how WTO has become a farce now. There is no free trade at all. Everywhere the trade has become totally restricted due to non-tariff barriers. I had done a lot of work on WTO and related issues, and now we find that WTO has become defunct. And all the countries who preach for free trade have been practicing actually non-tariff barriers which restrict the trade. Therefore, we have to have a new approach to the concept of development, concept of life, though you may say that it is utopian, but somewhere the beginning has to be made. And with these few words, I don't know how much time I took. I lose time when I start speaking on these subjects, and I have made my presentation. I'm sorry, Deodhar, if I run into your time a little bit, but kindly.
It's okay. Okay. Thank you, Professor. Let's.
Yeah. Thank you.
Let's move on to Professor Deodhar. Let me quickly introduce him. I guess there's a presentation. Professor Deodhar teaches economics at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. He has a PhD in agricultural economics from Ohio State University and a master's in economics from Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics in Pune. He has worked on imperfectly competitive market structures, World Trade Organization, agricultural trade, food quality, and CSR issues. He has many awards and honors to his credit, among which is the Devang Mehta Best Professor of Economics Award in 2012 and 2015 by the Business Affairs. He has also been the recipient of Distinguished Young Professor Award for Excellence in Research from IIA. With that, over to you, Professor, for your talk. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, so I have a total 1 hour now, right? Including, is that correct?
Minutes would be better, 45 minutes, 50 minutes.
Yeah, okay.
But,
Okay, great. So maybe you can show me a yellow card if I really start going beyond, and then red card. But yeah. So let me just quickly, you can see my PPT, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So a quick synopsis of what I'm going to talk about. I'll just give motivation and background for the talk I'm going to give today. What are the ancient sources I have looked at? I think Professor Panchamukhi talked about dimensions of welfare. I'll maybe quickly go over it faster than required. Then I'll talk about state and economic policies, a little bit on prices, interest rates, taxes, what the ancients were talking about, references to labor and land as well, and what are the implications for the current policy, right? So these are the things I'm going to talk about. So let me give you motivation. As a young undergrad student, studying in Gokhale Institute, and sometimes such a impression, we have such an impressionable mind, and we keep hearing. I had a professor who taught us Marxian economics, and he would talk about base and superstructure, and the seeds of destruction are sown in the womb of the class relations and class forces, and I think I was really enthralled. And to top it all, then somebody would say that, well, if you talk about economic planning, first 5 years, 4 decades of India, we had a Hindu rate of growth, right? And another one would talk about, Hindu equilibrium, as if something was wrong with Indians that we were doing very poorly. So you start looking in the other courses, like we had a course on economic history. And 2 books were History of Economic Thought by Eric Roll, History of Economic Analysis by Schumpeter. Now they talk about references to Old Testament, New Testament, Greco-Roman, mercantilists, physiocrats, classical economists. However, nothing on Indian economic thought or thinkers. So you start wondering, maybe there is nothing, no mention in these history books also, and we are doing very poorly. We are calling ourselves as a Hindu rate of growth, and must be something wrong with us. And so very melancholous. And then very recently, 2016, I read a book, Making of Modern Economics by Skousen. And he says, before Adam Smith, 6,000 years of recorded history had passed without a seminal work on the subject that dominated every waking hour of practically every human being. And I thought this can't be true, right? For a country of continental proportions with a history of more than 5,000 years, this can't be true. There has to be something there. So that was my starting point. And then I looked at background checks, what our modern Indian thinkers have been saying about our past. And as I mentioned, the zeitgeist of the time was that Raj Krishna would say Hindu rate of growth, Deepak Lal would call Hindu equilibrium, and as if we were all enamored with otherworldly attitudes. And therefore, that otherworldly attitude was keeping us, with a low growth rate. And later on, one figures out that probably Raj Krishna's Hindu rate of growth was probably a fig leaf for a low socialist GDP growth rate. Now, as we look back, we figure out that, and Dr. Shenoy, who had the descent note to the second 5-year plan, right? He opposed socialist policies. And he was the modern day Ram exiled to Lanka. Actually, I was told that finally he found a job in Sri Lanka. So he was exiled in Lanka in the modern times, right? So that was, then by the way, Kautilya, till very recently, till last century, early last century, was just a protagonist of the play Mudra Rakshas by Vishakha Datta, like characters in Mahabharata and Ramayana, right? But it was only when Shama Sastri unearthed the Arthashastra circa about 1910 that we knew that this is not just a character in Mudra Rakshas play, but a person in flesh and blood who walked on this earth, right? And then Nehru writes a book, Discovery of India, from Ahmednagar jail, and he calls Kautilya as India's Machiavelli, right? Though Arthashastra was written 2 millennia prior to Machiavelli, and scope of Arthashastra is much wider. He talks about economics, polity, administration, defense, and many more things. So I think Machiavelli at best could be flattered by saying Kautilya of Italy. So that should have been the case probably, right? And there were 2 other treatises, Shukraniti Sara, which was also found out in the early 19th century. And then there is Thirukkural, the Tamil treatise. If you all put together, certainly we were not otherworldly people. We were not people, Indian subcontinent was not full of people who were looking otherworldly, and therefore GDP growth rate was probably low. So these books, Arthashastra, Shukraniti Sara or Thirukkural, are Smruti literature, not Shruti literature. Shruti literature is the sacred literature. The Vedas, Upanishads, Mimamsas, these are Shruti literature. That means revealed to the rishis and revealed by rishis, right? So there is no, it is a Paurusheya, not one single author who dictates what has happened. There are no commandments as such, but these are philosophical, thinkings of bigger kind. But Arthashastra, Shukranidhi, Sara, Thirukal are Smriti literature. That means they are secular literature. For example, Manusmriti is also a Smriti. That means this is a secular literature. It's a constitution for those times. These are not sacred literature. So Arthashastra in Kautilya admits that his contribution was based on previous works. Then he makes reference to Brihaspati and Shukracharya. Unfortunately, of course, those works are lost, or probably they are in some libraries either in India or in Europe or in US. But at this time, Brihaspati and Shukracharya's original texts don't exist. So I scouted for references in Vedas, most of our ancient literature, and what should I look for? So I looked for, what are the objectives of life? What is the concept of state and economic policies? Is there some mention of public goods and market facilitation? What about prices, interests, taxes, and land and labor issues? So this is what I will basically cover. I think to some extent, Dr. Panchamukhi has talked about unidimensionality of the modern economics literature. That standard economic objective is self-interest, right? So Adam Smith said it is not the benevolence of the bakers, brewers, and butchers we get our everyday dinner, but their self-interest, and that self-interest is matched by an objective function which is either utility maximization or profit maximization. So that's the typical one, right? However, ancient Indian tradition is multidimensional. As Professor Panchamukhi mentioned, we are guided by three fourfold facets of life. That is fourfold objectives, which are Purusharthas, then fourfold stages of life, which are ashramas, and fourfold professions, which are varnas, right? So 4 times 4 times 4, we have 64 different combinations. And each one is free to choose a combination, right? Welfare, therefore, is much more a holistic concept. There is no representative consumer. So this is a big thing coming out of this. In economic literature, we talk about a representative consumer, but we are saying no, in Indian tradition, probably there is no representative consumer. What's happening is you have these 4 purusharthas or objectives of life, dharma, artha, kama, moksha. You have 4 stages of life, brahmacharya, grihastha, vanaprastha, sannyas. And as you move through the life stages, probably your emphasis on different objectives also changes. Once again, your objectives and life stages are also guided by what occupation you are in. And therefore, what you have is actually a welfare brick. You could be anywhere going through different parts in different stages of life. You could be at different points, right? For example, point B can represent Dr. Shivan, who is the chairperson of ISRO. He is a householder, a simple person. If you meet outside on the streets, you will not even think that he is chairman of an organization which sends missions to Mars, right? Or you can think of somebody else, maybe Vijay Mallya. He's a bachelor, but has a flamboyant lifestyle, right? So everybody is choosing out of these 64 combinations, and that is what, therefore, there is no representative person as such, the consumer as such. So let me consider the first objective, dharma. So what is dharma? Dharma means righteous acts, truthfulness, ahimsa, which is, ahimsa, by the way, means minimal injury. I had slides for that, but I think I'll skip that so that we stick to time limits. Charity, these are the different aspects of dharma. So even in behavioral economics in modern times, now we are saying that life objectives can be much more than just utility maximization. The social relations, community well-being, health, of course, and many others that are also part of your total welfare, right? Amartya Sen talks about rational fools, actions out of commitment to do something good. And he doesn't call it dharma, but that is what dharma would mean, actions out of commitment to do something good. And that's the dharma for you, right? Even nudging behavior is there in these days talked about in behavioral economics, right? For example, 2, 3 years ago, when I would return to Ahmedabad at the airport, as I step out of the airport, there'll be a big hoarding. There'll be a lady, a poor lady, thanking people, saying that thanks for giving up your LPG subsidy. I'm getting a cooking gas. I don't have to use now. I don't have to burn wood, right? Now, for some time it went on, and probably now everybody is given up on this subsidy, maybe by choice, or later government removed it. But certainly there was a nudging behavior. That means one is appealing to one's dharma or the ethical conduct. Give up your subsidy. Probably that's a better approach than having fiats to do things. Shukraniti Sara, another document that I mentioned. Their household is a unit of welfare, not an individual. I'll give you one example here. He talks about household being part of a society, and for society to remain, there are collective responsibilities. And he gives a very witty quote. I'm going to share a witty quote from him. Family or household is a unit of analysis. Shukraniti Sara. He says, "Kanya ure trupam mata vittam pita shrutam bandhava kulam icchanti mishtanne itare janaha." He says that for marriage to succeed, youth looks for beauty or handsomeness, mother looks for wealth of the other party, father looks for the learning of the other party, friends look for the status of the family, and outsiders just are interested in food and festivities. Right? But I think this captures a story that we are not just individuals maximizing our things. We are in a family. Family is part of the society, and that is how welfare is being judged. So that's behavioral economics for you. And of course, if you go by the advices given at different stages by different characters in our ancient literature, when Ram tells to Bharata that when you go back, Bharat comes with Ram up to Chitrakoot or somewhere to bid him goodbye when he goes to Aranya, to forest. When Bharata is to return, Rama says, do your duty. You are a Kshatriya. Welfare of your subjects is your objective now. And you have to do that till I return. Kumbhakarna tells Ravana, look, I'm your brother, I'll fight out with Ram. But please remember your dharma, you are not following your dharma. So everywhere in our literature, we are told righteous conduct has been talked about, including in economic behavior as well. Nachiketa, and you may know the story of Nachiketa and Vajrashrava. Vajrashrava is giving donations, but he's a conceited man. He starts giving things which are not useful. So he gives cows which are dry, which can't even graze properly, and he's giving them to others. So Nachiketa, he looks at this and he says, look, what are you doing? I'm so important to you. Are you also giving me to somebody? And his father says, he's a very conceited man. He says, I'll hell with you. You go to hell. He really donates him to Yama. And what happens later is a different story. But the argument is that, even the son is telling father that have righteous conduct, and that's important. Tirukural also talks about Aram. One of the chapters is on Dharma. So I think one can look at that as well. Let me come to charity as a part of Dharma. In Rigveda, I'll give you some examples. Charity has been a voluntary act. Mostly in Indian tradition, there are no fiats, there are no 10 commandments. People are told this is good, this is bad, you decide what you want to do, right? So in Rigveda, here's a quote. Death comes in various ways, even to a well-fed person. Riches come to her like the rolling of a cartwheel. Hence, the rich should give alms to the poor, who become her friends in future troubles. Now, similarly, you find in Gita, there are three kinds of charity. I think Professor Panchamukhi talked about Sattvic, Rajas, and Tamas, right? And Tamas is basically what Vajrashrava and Nachiketa's story I talked about, right? King Janaka just gives up everything without any expectations. King Raghu gives without any expectation. That's what Kalidas is talking. That's really the charity. And basically, if you want to put it in the modern terminology, charity is basically to create positive externalities. When there are positive externalities and markets fails, somebody needs to do charity so that more consumption is provided, more knowledge is provided, right? So that's, I think, even though it might not have been talked about in so many words, but that was being practiced. And Indian tradition has been experiential tradition rather than theoretical tradition, right? And that's the difference I think I see here. In West Asia, for example, charity was mandated as a religious tax. Tithe means 1/10. Sadaqah is also 1/10 in Jewish terminology, and zakat is 2.5% of your wealth. You must give, if you follow this faith, you must give this. There is a diktat, there is a fiat. In Indian tradition, it's a voluntary act. So what Rigveda says, this is what it is. I'm telling you good things, bad things, right? What happens? I'm telling you the consequences. You decide whether you want to give charity or not. Unfortunately, in India now we have 2% charity for certain firms. And there is a literature that if you say 2% of your net profits is going to be your CSR activity, there's an anchoring effect. Maybe somebody would have done more than 2%. Now they'll do just 2%. And then others, there will be an obfuscating effect. There will be a whole industry there. So that's not really Sattvic charity. I think that we have to keep that in mind. It has to come through your high school education or college education, and then you become corporate leaders. I think by that time you must have attained a way of philosophy that you want to donate. 2% thing probably is more kind of a draconian. Let's look at wealth and artistic pleasures. Are we aware? Were we only otherworldly people? Certainly not. No, look there's a witty quote here again from Rigveda. Rigveda says, we follow our desires like cows follow one after the other. A frog looks forwards to a flood. An arrowsmith seeks someone who will pay him in gold. A craftsman seeks something that is to be restored. And finally, that's the most interesting, a priest seeks worshippers. Even a priest has desires. He cannot stand at the pulpit and he expects that there will be people to listen to him and he'll make his points, right? So therefore, desire, everybody has it. In Mahabharata, another quote. This is very interesting. This is Arjuna telling Yudhishthira, and Yudhishthira at the drop of a hat would say that I will become a mendicant, right? So when he gets his kingdom, he says, no, I don't want to do this, I will have to tax people, I have to generate revenues, and I have to again spend, and I don't want all this. So here is what Arjuna says. Arjuna says, wealth brings accession to wealth, just like domesticated elephants are used to capture wild elephants. What an elegant terminology for those periods. No, it's capital begets capital, right? So it's like domesticated elephants are used to capture wild elephants. And therefore, religious acts, pleasures, joys, courage, wrath, learning, and sense of dignity all proceed from wealth. Who says that Indians were otherworldly, right? And there are Sri Shukta, Dice hymn, Chamakam prayers in the Vedas, all talk about material well-being and, importantly, earning money through right means. In Dice hymn, actually, there is a gambler. There's a story about a gambler. He gambles a lot, gives up, he loses his wife also. So finally, he concludes that I think that gambling is not good. Make a lot of money, but through righteous means. Do a good farming and make a lot of money. And that is what that gambler finally says. And there are references to artistic expressions. You might have heard of Natya Shastra, but that was in the early part of the Common Era. But Nata Sutras go back as 700 BCE. These are aphorisms for actors and they are part of Vedic literature. There are two Vedic branches and this is much earlier than Kautilya. So we are talking about dance, architecture, arts, literature. Nowhere you can claim that Indians were otherworldly and therefore your GDP growths were low, you were in the medieval period down, and so also just after independence. I think book 2 and 3 of Thirukural titled Porul. Porul means wealth and Imbam means pleasures. This is in Tamil. There are a whole lot of aphorism about this. And I think one should probably, one gets time, one should look at these as well. And of course, I think Professor Panchamukhi also mentioned Charvak philosophy, right? He was literally against the Vedic philosophers. And this is what he said. He says, that's called Lokayat philosophy. Yavat jivet sukham jivet runam krutva ghratam pibet bhasmi bhutasya dehasya punaragamnam kuta. Drink ghee even if you have to borrow steel. For once you are consigned to flame, there is no coming back. And that is what he's talking about. And it was also a respected philosophy by them. In fact, he was very critical of Vedic rishis. He says, he really criticized them that they are telling you about afterlife and all that, Punarjanma and all that, nothing, just enjoy life here. And there are a few others also of this kind. So therefore, it's just not true that we are only otherworldly. Then let me talk about division of labor and ashrama system. When you talk about ashrama system, right, it has come out at least 500 BCE or earlier. It's mentioned in Mahabharata. Isn't it same to Modigliani's hypothesis, life cycle hypothesis? You have a Spartan life of a student. You may beg, you may be on alms. Then you earn money and enjoy as a householder. And you make enough savings during that time. So once you retire, you live off your savings. And of course, renunciation is the additional one which is added by our saints. But this is nothing but the life cycle theory of Modigliani in simple terms. So, and these stages need not be chronological. One could choose. So Adi Shankara, right at the early age of childhood, he decides to remain bachelor and becomes a sannyasi. So he jumps those stages. So one could be simply, for most of us, it could be biological stages. But for others, it could be just, a choice, right? So as I mentioned, for Malya, it's a choice. And Adi Shankara, it's a choice. Both are bachelors, but different lifestyles, right? Let me come to Varna system. This is as Professor Panchamukhi mentioned, most wrongly understood system that we have. There's a different, Varna points to Guna Karma. There is a whole Upanishad, what is called a Vajrasuchi Upanishad. It just talks about who is a Brahmin, who is a Kshatriya, and it is such a wonderful, short but crisp Upanishad. Says nothing about birth. I'll tell you, Gita also says, I think Professor Panchamukhi quoted it, Chaturvarnyam maya srishtam guna karma vibhagashaha. Distinction is based on guna and karma. Clearly stated, nowhere the birth is coming into the picture. You look at the Sanskrit play Veni Sahar by Bhatta Narayana. Now, Bhatta Narayana is supposed to be a Brahmin, but he is putting words in the mouth of Karna. Karna is telling Arjuna, Suto va Suta putro va ya vayo kayo bhavamyaham daivayattam kule janma madayattam tu paurusham. He's clearly saying whether I am a charioteer or a charioteer's son, whoever else I am, birth is family depends on fate, gallantry and deeds depend on me. Clear statements, you will find n number of such examples. Nowhere ever in the Indian civilization we have said this is birth based. And I'll give you an example from Mahabharata. All the four orders, there is a discussion between Bhrigu Rishi and Bharadwaj Rishi. And they are saying, what are these four orders? Are they birth based? And then Bhrigu says all the four orders mingle together and could possess lust, wrath, fear, cupidity, grief, anxiety, hunger, and toil. Then how can they be different? Right? And then Bharadwaj says they also cannot be distinguished from one another, for all emit sweat, urine, feces, phlegm, bile, and blood. Created equal by Brahman, people have, in consequence of their acts, become distributed into different orders. Clear statements in Mahabharata also. And look what Ambedkar is saying in his collected works. Upanayanam, actually, in India we have convocation. That means once you got your degree, that's it, no more learning. In US they call it commencement, right? Commencement of your journey of after graduation, right? So Upanayana was a commencement ceremony at the end of 12 years at Guru's ashrama. So Varna was bestowed on the base of learning that you had in the ashrama, and who else but the Rishi who taught you would know best, and that is what the commencement or the Upanayana ceremony was. What happened over time is people started sending their kids to ashrama, but before that they started doing the Upanayana. So therefore, before you went to ashrama, you are now, Varna was fixed because Upanayana was done in home itself. And that's certainly a distraction from the whole thing that we know today. Adam Smith, for example, you can relate the same thing. He says difference between a street porter and a philosopher is not the cause of division of labor, but rather a consequence of it. Due to education, customs, and habits, naturally. So you may get, so giving access to education is fundamentally correct. One must give that. But rest, the Varna is formed on goods and deeds, your deeds and your accomplishments, right? Let me talk about concept of state and economic policies. There are different forms of state mentioned in Aitareya Brahmana. And you must have heard of Janapadas. There were Mahajanapadas and 12 Janapadas. Now these were Rajyam, Maharajyam, Swarajyam, Samrajyam, Vairajyam, which is a kingless state. And if some of you celebrate Ganesh Chaturthi and 10 days, when the Lord Ganapati is, he's anointed as a king for those 10 days. And there is a mantra called Mantra Pushpanjali. When you recite that, it is talking about Rajyam, Maharajyam, Swarajyam. If you recite that, to me, this is the world's pioneer anthem. It's talking about different parts of states, distributed over the Jambu Dvipa or the Indian subcontinent. Republics, Janapadas, of course, Ambedkar says kings were a representative of the people. I can give you a few examples. King Sagara did not appoint his son as king. King Bharata did not appoint his son as a king because they were not fit to rule. And then the body of their advisors selected somebody else. Same is true when Ram and Lakshmana's father, he passes away, right? So there is nobody there. There is nobody to rule. And then King Rishi Vasishtha and others, Jabali and others, they say, we have to appoint a king now. Don't wait for the sons to return. We need to lead this country. And they are about to select somebody. But by that time, I think Bharata returns from somewhere. So it is clear that in Janapadas, king was a representative of the people. Somebody had to lead, and that's why it's called a republic. And there were concerns for public goods for sure. When Yudhishthira is appointed as king, Narada comes there, right? Unfortunately, the Narada's image in Indian subcontinent now is that he just takes one thing from here, describes something there, and starts some conflict. But Narada was a learned man. He's asking pertinent questions to Yudhishthira. He says, have you constructed water tanks and lakes at periodic distances in arid regions? He asks, have you given loans to farmers at concessional rates? He asks questions on internal security to protect citizens and industries. He says, it's a welfare state. Are you taking care of the blind, the dumb, and the lame? He asks questions on external security and mentions that war should be the last priority, for it consumes exchequer which can be used for other public goods. What is happening today? We wish we could just win back our Kashmir. We wish we could do many more things, but we can't because war is the last priority. We'll try, and I think current government is trying all of the possibilities. When Indian head of our Indian Prime Minister gets accolades from West Asian countries, I think we are trying our best not to have war, but do other things first, right? Because it's expensive. So it compares well with the modern policies of the state. The concept of revenue deficit, the modern concept of revenue deficit. Narada asked Yudhishthira, the king, whether or not his administrative expenses were 1/4, 1/3, or at worst 1/2 of his income, because the rest should be for these developmental activities. So it basically is kind of alluding to not having revenue deficits. Kautilya says the same thing. He talks about salaries of the babus should not exceed 25% of your revenues. That is what Kautilya was talking about. Shukranidhi Sara, if you read, he has very similar concepts he is talking about. So certainly this fiscal prudence was very much there, and even developmental activities were also talked about. I'll give you one more example. You have heard of Kalidasa was a great dramatist, and we all know him for Meghadutam. And in Meghadutam, that Megha, that cloud, is a messenger. Right? It's a melancholic story that one Kinnar or Gandharva, is sent to earth, he's cursed, he's sending message through the cloud to his fiancée in Himalayas. But the same Kalidasa in Raghumosham, he's calling the Megha or the cloud as the government treasury. And this is in 4th century AD. What he's saying is just like hot sun evaporates waters, and the following year it comes in the form of clouds and it rains and agriculture flourishes. Similarly, government taxes people, and that adds to the treasury, that's the cloud, and in the following years you get expenditure made by the government. Let me give an example on interest rates. Panini, about 700 BC, talks about daily and monthly compounding, not even simple interest rate. Kautilya talks of interest rate varying with riskiness of borrowing. He says if you are going to the sea route, there is a higher tax. If you are going through jungle, there is a different tax. For a local business, there is a lower tax. Clearly, there is an association between interest and riskiness of the asset. And compare this with Greeks. Greeks called money as barren and charging interest as bad as murder. And this is what Aristotle thought and Cato the Elder thought. And the same Greco-Roman thought pervaded in the West Asian religions as well. And therefore, charging interest was sin. We in English literature, some of you, many of us must have heard of Merchant of Venice, right? There's this poor Antonio is looking for loan for his voyages, trading, and Shylock is the Jewish moneylender. Why he is villainized there? Because in Western tradition, they could not charge interest. That was a sin. A Jew cannot charge interest to a Jew, however, but Jew could charge interest to a non-Jew. And therefore, Jews were looked down upon historically. And same is the case here in Shylock. And you know the famous saying, a pound of flesh, not a drop of blood, right? I think this instance has that connotation that interest charging was sin. In India, that was not the case. We are charging interest as per the riskiness of the asset. That is what Kautilya is saying. Panini talks about daily and monthly compounding. So I think things are much different in Indian context. By the way, if you read Shukranidhi Sara, he limits how much interest can be paid and when capital should be paid. If you have paid interest, which is twice the amount of the principal, then Shukranidhi says that you need not pay any more interest. Further, if you have paid 4 times the principal. If you have paid the interest, you did not even return the principal. Well, this is what for those times he must have come up with, but you are trying to basically make sure balance the interest of both borrowers and the lenders in this process, right? So that is what Shukraniti Sara was doing. This is a quote from Mahabharata. Again, this is about taxation. You know, it's kind of, you could, with afterthought, you could say this is like Laffer curve or progressive taxation, right? This is now Bhishma. Bhishma telling the Sharapanjari Bhishma. Bhishma is on those 100 arrows. No, he's on the battleground, and he's telling now Yudhishthira that now you are going to rule. So therefore, a king should tax like bee sucking honey from the flowering plants. Now, how mature this example is. When a bee sucks honey from the flower, the beauty of the flower is not gone. In fact, there is pollination. That means in the following year, there will be more fruits and plants. So it's a reproductive example, right? Tax burden should be enhanced gradually, just like burden on young bullocks is increased gradually. This is like saying progressive taxation, right? And compare this with J.B. Colbert, the 16th century finance minister in France, to the king. He's saying the art of taxation consists in so plucking the goose as to procure the largest quantity of feathers with the least possible amount of hissing. Maybe he's talking about efficiency of taxes, but still this is exploitative in nature. You're making that poor bird look so filthy, right? But the example of sucking flower by the honey is much more mature, right? And I think we do find this difference. Certainly Indians were not otherworldly, and they had many more economic principles well understood. Let me talk about factors of production. In Shukla Yajurveda, there are so many examples of different professions, from acrobats to astrologers, basket makers to butchers, and I can go on. And all this is mentioned. Why? Because somebody is doing a sacrificial fire, and for the welfare of all people who are helping me in my life, their welfare also should be higher. And this is what in that hymn it is talking about, right? In Ramayana, again, there are examples of land surveyors, land plotters, land diggers, mechanical operators. When Ram is to return, they use description of how the city is now being bedecked. And all these professional names are mentioned. Concern for labor. Both Rama and Narada, they advised to Bharata and Yudhishthira respectively, never to delay payments of workers, else corruption creeps in. There were labor unions. It is not that after Karl Marx came in 19th century, mid of 19th century, and then unions got their importance. But there were labor unions. They are called nigamas, sanghas, or nikayas. And union leaders were called shreshthas. And these union leaders would help king in forming the state policies and represent king in different forums. This is reminders of FICCI and CII today. Right? Let me talk about land and property rights. In Indian languages, Sanskrit for sure, earth is called Vasudha or Vasundhara. Dhru is the dhatu, which means to hold. So that means land was not wealth, but it was something which creates wealth or holds wealth. And therefore, there is a concept of Ashtalakshmi in Indian tradition. 8 Lakshmis are basically, one is money, one is cattle stock, one is, you call different things. However, land is never money because land creates money. And that's why it's Vasundhara. Now, there is no, by the way, when you talk about land, there is nothing like eminent domain concept in Indian tradition. Eminent domain means it comes from the Western tradition where Lord owns everything. You, me, the land, everything is owned by the Lord. And Lord's representative on earth is the king. And therefore, king has right to confiscate your property. Now, Britishers used the same eminent domain principle because they wanted land for railways so that railways can reach from hinterland to the ports. They wanted lands for various purposes, so they could use confiscate. Unfortunately, we continued with the same eminent domain principle after independence. All our dams, Hirakud, Bhagra Nandul, you name it, and unfortunately there was no social media, and therefore what went wrong with the villagers there or the tribals there never came to light. But if there was social media, one would have got to know about it. And in fact, there's a statement I mentioned in one of my writings that Nehru said that, well, and Nehru had a mentality of the Soviet Union style thinking. He said, well, for Mother Russia, like for Mother India, if you have to suffer, you have to suffer. That is how he had been quoted by somebody. So eminent domain was really bad, but that was not in our tradition. For example, Purva Mimamsa clearly says that king's power is only to govern, and therefore he doesn't own all the land in the country. There are examples where kings had to buy land to give it as donations. So therefore, there was no eminent domain. The concept of private property, therefore, did emerge earlier on. And last factor of protection, entrepreneurship. Again, Shukruddin Sara has nice couplets. I'll just briefly mention one to you. He's talking about entrepreneurship. So he says, Amantram aksharam nasti, nasti moolam anaushadam, ayogyaha purusho nasti, yochaka tatra durlabha. He's saying there is no word that has no effect like a mantra. There is no herb which has no medical effect. There is no person who is worthless, but rare indeed is an entrepreneur. Yojaka. Yojak means somebody who organizes factors for production. That is a rare person. And he uses the word yojaka. So that's so lot of thought had gone through, economic thought had gone through in our literature. Let me quickly, last couple of slides, there's few takeaways from this. Somebody has said, a philosopher has said that science without history is like man without memory. We don't want to attempt by when we say all this, there is no intention of wiggishness here, meaning we are not trying to thrust completeness of economics into the ancient writings. What we are saying is these proto-economic ideas were very much there in our Indian society. Schumpeter said one does not profit from visiting the lumber room, provided one does not spend too much time there. We do profit. Of course, we don't want to spend too much time. 2 hours, I think, in this webinar is certainly good enough for us, right? Indian economic thought certainly is not otherworldly. Varna was division of labor, not mass slavery, which was endorsed by Aristotle. By the way, if you read Aristotle, Pliny the Elder, they approved mass slavery and they said, "This, what can we do? People are like that." And these are the quotations. I mean, even Schumpeter quotes them. We never had mass slavery in India, right? Charging interest was neither a sin nor money was considered barren, as thought by the Greeks, Romans, and West Indian religion. Concept of union, state policy, varnashrama, purushartha were very well thought out. And of course, I must mention this, do not have too many taxes. If you read Kautilya, Kautilya advocates only 2 tax rates. I'm not saying 2 taxes, 2 tax rates. For domestic, there is 5%, 10%. For customs duty imports, 10%, 20%, that's it. Only 2 rates of taxes. Doesn't it apply to GST and customs duties? The moment you have more custom duties, more obfuscation happens, more under invoicing happens, all kinds of things come in. And it's and you just have all this administrative setup to catering only to these charging of different taxes. GST, same story. I wish there was only a 10% tax for all commodities. Life will be so simpler. Probably we'll have more revenues also. But then you keep changing from 0 to 5 to 6, from 12, 18, 24 plus additional cess. Why create so much administrative inefficiency, right? And I think Kautilya had thought through this. Pay commissions, another example. Kautilya has talked about salaries right from a palanquin holder, the most unskilled labor, to the advisors to the king. And they vary from 60 panas a year to 48,000 panas a year. How much variation is there? If we have wide variability of this in our pay commissions, it will capture the skill differences. Otherwise, efficient, intelligent IAS officers would like to join corporates. In pay commissions, there has to have a lot more, variety in terms of payment structures. If you try to be more socialistic in it, then where is the incentive for good, intelligent people to stay in the government? Quantitative easing. I'll give you this example. In Kautilya's Arthashastra, he has given a detailed description of how coins are made. Right? By the way, Kharavela was the king after Ashoka passed away. After that, Kharavela once again from Orissa, he captured all his lost ground. Kharavela knew, he was a mint master also. He knew how to mint coins. So that also science was very much there. Now, Kautilya talks about how to make silver coins, copper coins, how much should be copper content in the coin of a silver coin. And there is Mahavamsha, the Buddhist treatise. It mentions that Kautilya, when you know the story of Kautilya, he was insulted by Mahananda, so he left the darbar. And on the way, he picked up Chandragupta. He took him to Takshashila. For 8 years, he trained him and they returned. But when they returned, now they had to attack Mahananda. Where to get the treasury? There is a description. Mahavamsha says that from 1 crore revenue to 8 crore revenue, Kautilya increased revenue. How? It was deficit financing, quantitative easing. Copper coins he converted into silver coins by just having a plating of silver to the copper coins for increased revenue from 1 crore to 8 crore, minting coins. That's quantitative easing for you by Kautilya in those times. And we are talking about 400 BC or back. We talked about dharmic approach to political economy, right? Giving out gas subsidy, ethical behavior in borrowing, same letter of credit Malla's and Nirav Modi is using for all banks. Somewhere this has to, dharmic training has to happen at the high school level and college level, not at the later stage probably, that will certainly help. Choksis of the world who are in West Indies, they have been giving donations to unworthy causes in India, as we found out. That's not a sattvic charity. Now, just making 2% forcing on people may not be the right approach. I think it's too late. Maybe high schools, primary schools, and colleges, that is where you need to inculcate ideas of dharmic behavior. Right? Honoring property rights. Rama returns to Ayodhya, right? This is the quote, I'll just tell you. Lakshmana says, once Rama wins the war against Ravana, then Lakshmana says, Lakshmana is little, immature-ish kind of person, right? Lakshmana says, Suvarnamai Lanka, let's settle here. Let's rule from here. Why don't you settle down here now that you got your Sita? And that's where Rama says, Api Swarnamai Lanka Name Lakshmana Rochite, Janani Janma Bhumischa Swargad Api Garyasi. My motherland is most dear to me and my mother is dear to me. Right? So this is property rights. I didn't want Sri Lanka. This was not mine. My job was done. I'm going back. And isn't that true with our Indian soldiers who went to Bangladesh after winning Dhaka? I think I hear General Singh and few others. They returned. There was a huge black Mercedes of General Niazi. They rode back. Rama came back in Pushpak Vimana. Our generals came back in the black Mercedes Benz from Dhaka to Calcutta, right? But they returned because you don't covet somebody else's property. It was a different country for whatever reasons. In 47, it is a different country, and therefore we returned. I think some of these, whatever sublimely we have learned from our traditions, it gets reflected in our modern day behavior also. Isha Upanishad talks about advice to households. Isha Upanishad says, advice to household, Ma Grudha Kasya Svidadam, do not covet wealth of anybody else. So this is respect of property rights. I think subliminally in all our mythology or our Vedic literature or Ramayana, Puranas, subliminally we are told about dharmic behavior, and somehow it does come out in the Indian context, and therefore probably we are a little different than many other countries, right? Arthashastra definition. I could have talked about many more things about Arthashastra, but just summing it up. What is Arthashastra? Kautilya defines sustainable use of natural resources for the welfare of people is Arthashastra. I think since the topic was sustainable development, I thought I'll conclude by saying this. This is what Arthashastra I talked about. This is like, I think I don't want to go more. I'll just stop here. So I think an early exposure to these proto-economic ideas to the rest of the world would have hastened the development of classical economics. I think we ourselves did not know it. So slowly, hopefully, it gets embedded somewhere in our undergraduate teaching as well. And I think as, we don't have to be too proud of ourselves, but knowing certain our past helps us, because man without memory, science without history is like man without memory. So I think we should pay little attention to this for sure. Thank you. I think I'll conclude my session.
Thank you. So I think, Charan, do we have any time for questions?
Yes, first of all, I think I also have a question. And I
think we can remove the presentation so we can see more people.
Yes, sure. Yeah.
Okay, we got everybody here right now. Okay, good. Vishandas, Professor Vishandas, or you want to ask, Charan, you want to ask something first, or should I take it to Vishandas?
Let Dr. Vishandas ask first, then I'll come in.
Right. Okay, Ashok. I can't hear you. Unmute.
Sir, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. And I must congratulate both the panelists, Professor Satish Deodhar and Professor Panchamukhi, for giving a so much depth and the width on the subject. We were simply overwhelmed. So, sir, one question to each of the panelists. My first question is to Professor Panchamukhi ji, and he said about the average propensity to resources consumption and then use. Well, this as a conceptually, it looks very attractive. But the question is, suppose as an economist, I want to indulge in this kind of thing. What will be the methodology? I know it's difficult to explain in this, but if we can briefly tell whether somebody had done that work. I'm not aware of this. That is to Professor Panchamukhi and to Professor Deodhar, sir. He made very interesting thing that India retreated, or India came back after winning the Bangladesh thing, like Lakshman said, let us settle, and Rama overruled it. Suppose, and we compare this or contrast with what the China does. Do you think, of course, ethical issues are involved, but how to resolve that dilemma of ethical issue? And suppose it happens tomorrow again, will India do the same thing as it did in 1971?
Yes, well, of course, many of you, the young students, I have asked my students also to attend this seminar. Many of the young students may not know the history, but we know that why did we go for war? I mean, they were refugees, and mostly a significant amount of Hindus and Muslim refugees coming in. So it was a drain on our exchequer as well, right? And therefore we had to go there, correct? So are you referring to modern context of China taking over and we going, are you referring to that?
Yeah, right.
Right. Yeah. So I think as Kautilya and others said, Narada also said, the exchequer you have to take care of. You try all other means first, and war is the last option, right? And I think present government is trying many other ways also before war can happen. Probably, if we can get without war, nothing like it. I hope POK comes back without war, but China is a different story. So I think this is a political economy question, I suppose. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Professor Panchmukhi, are you still with us?
He seems he's there.
He is there.
Yeah, but he seems to be.
We can't see you or hear you. If you can put your unmute if you're muted. Okay, while we wait for him, perhaps we can take another question. Charan, you had some questions?
I must actually also compliment both Professor Panchmukhi and Professor Deodhar. It's been a very enlightening talk. I never knew there is so much of depth in this literature of our own. I must tell you and share a story with you, and that's an observation I want to make. It's a brief one. It is in 1993, I had an opportunity to go to Harvard and meet one of our professors there who later on got a Nobel Prize. I had asked him then that, look, you are the rarest of the rare, a professor in economics and a professor in philosophy. And therefore, I have come to ask you whether that what is here in Harvard and what has given you the reward, what is that we have in Arthashastra or in Kautilya or in Vedas? And I was given a blank reply that I don't know. And I was so stunned. I said, look, my limited knowledge says that there is so much there, but then here is nobody who has done research on it. So I must thank both of you today for doing this and bringing it to us. And I really feel, and that's where I conclude my observation on your presentations, I sincerely feel that in India, we need to do more research on economic concepts that took India to the glory of 5,000, 3,000 years being the richest on the planet. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? We can open the floor.
Sir,
Raising a hand, yeah.
sir,
I can't see you. Who is it?
Sir, Priyanshi Goyal.
Okay, please go ahead.
Sir, I have a question. I would like to thank both the professors. First of all, because being a student of philosophy and history, I have read these texts, and I would really thank both of you for such a comprehensive. But I have a question for Professor Vr Panchmukhi, sir. The issue of Mahabharat, whenever it's narrated by my grandparents, by my parents, it gives us so many answers, yet it raises so many questions also. And in this context only, I would like to ask to Professor Vr Panchmukhi that before the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita was given to Krishna, before the beginning of the war, the Great War, and he knew so much about it. He knew about the morals to pursue Nishkama Karma. He was so well read about ethics, morals. Yet we observed that as the heat of the war began to rise with passing days, the nature of the war, of how it was fought, also changed. Starting with it was dharmic, then there was treachery, there was lies, and perhaps this is what we observe in real life also, that when we start, we often think on ethical values, even in business, even in professions, but in the heat of the competition, in the heat of yielding results, so we often get lost with on our track and focus more on results, just like we observed in Mahabharata. So, sir, how would you comment on this? That how do we keep track of our morals while pursuing our economic interests or our professional interests for the outside world? Thank you.
Okay, good question. Yeah, is Professor Panchmukhi back with us? Okay, Professor Deodhar, you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, I can. I thought he was not unmuted, that's why. But did he answer? Otherwise, I can. I mean, I don't want to jump into it.
I don't see him. I don't think.
I can see him. He's speaking, but he is muted, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, okay,
yeah,
Professor. Yeah.
there. Okay. Yeah, you are right, Deodhar. I had muted it when you were speaking.
Yeah, go ahead, Professor.
Yeah, the story of Gita and morals is not the way in which you are looking at it. The life is complex, and there are different types of people, those who commit to morals and those who do not commit to morals. But Bhagavad Gita gives a normative picture of maintaining the normal morals. And also it also tells there are different types of people, Satvika, Rajasa, Tamasa. And when Tamasa people come, they deviate from the morals and create their own stories. And Rajasa people come, they create, that also Krishna tells very clearly. But Satvika is something which is ideal, which should be maintained throughout. It does not mean that. And then Arjuna, some people, when I gave lectures on Bhagavad Gita sometime in Vienna, when I was in UNIDO, an Austrian asked, Krishna is asking Arjuna to kill his relatives. What kind of moral is this? Then I answered that the relatives, that is what he says. Don't consider them as relatives, but consider them as wrongdoers, doers of adharma. And Kshatriya's duty is to perform his function in destroying the adharma and maintaining the dharma. Entire Bhagavad Gita's total message is that we must each one should do the duty unrelenting in an unrelenting manner. That is universal. That is all time. It's not just at that time, but all time. It's not that Bhagavad Gita is flouted later, but there are different types of people who flout the morals throughout. That's why, Madhvacharya, one of the philosophers, has written Mahabharata Tatparya Nirnaya. These conflicting situations come, and we have to answer these in different way. Why Krishna asked Bhima to hit Duryodhana on the knee, which is adharma. But then he says that Duryodhana had done so much adharma, and he needs to be given in the same coin. the return. That is not adharma. Adharma treated with, so it's very sukshma. Dharma is very sukshma. And Mahabharata Tatparya answers a number of questions which you are asking. I will suggest you, of course, it is in Sanskrit. So I will stop here. It's not a one-line statement. You know, it's one life is not a simple straight line. It is a curvilinear line with varieties of things, and that's why life becomes so much complex. I will stop at that. Thank you.
Okay.
Deodhar, would you like to supplement?
Yeah, well, may I? I think in front of you, I should be
Yeah.
saying anything.
No, please go ahead. Yeah.
So no, I think Ramayana is talking about ideal ways of life. Mahabharata is not talking about ideal ways of life. It's telling you the whole story of everybody, and you have to learn lessons from it, right? For example, the word ahimsa does not mean no himsa. That's a wrong interpretation. I'll give you another Sanskrit word. For a beautiful lady, there's a word called anudara. Anudara means, udara means stomach or waist, right? So anudara doesn't mean somebody who doesn't have waist or stomach. It just means slim, right? So means in a different context. So therefore, ahimsa doesn't mean no himsa. It means minimal himsa. In fact, even I would have shown some references in my talk also. I had them there. In Manusmriti, they say, it's Manusmriti saying that, well, you can eat meat, you can have liquor, but if you avoid, that's better. Now, there is no fiat. I think even Manusmriti is not giving you a commandment. It's telling you, you can have this, you can have that, but it's better not to have it. It's left to you to decide. And I think that is the best thing about Indian culture, you know. So I think there's a saying that in Mahabharata, whatever is there in Mahabharata, you may find elsewhere. And whatever is elsewhere, it will be there. But if it is not in Mahabharata, it will not be anywhere. So Mahabharata is talking everything. So you have to learn the right things from it. I think that's the best way to look at Mahabharata as compared to Ramayana. Am I all right, Professor Panchamukhi?
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Good, yeah.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Right. Any other questions? Okay, I think we've kind of used up our time. Thank you very much. I think I learned a lot. You know, the way I look at it, I think Professor Deodhar, you explained it very well. We should know the economic history which came from our own literature, our own economic philosophers or whatever. They were generally called philosophers, whether they did science or philosophy or whatever. There was no specialization as such as we have today. But yeah, I think the history is very important because particularly because we've been suffused so much with Western history and Western approaches and Western thinking that I'm afraid, yeah, a majority of the people, some of us escape, but a majority of the people just get infused with that way of thinking and approach that they can't see, they refuse to see any other approach. And so from that perspective, and I don't agree with people in the sense that we are brainwashing or anything. I think we should learn our own history and culture first, and then you have lots of time. Nobody's stopping you from learning everybody else's history. I mean, when you grow up, you can do all kinds of things. But as children, we should learn our own history and culture and philosophy, and then obviously you develop on it in the best way you think fit. And I think the second point which has been emphasized is the choice. That is my understanding from the little I read when I was young, is that there are few commandments as such. There's always your choice. There's all kinds of suggestions and paths and whatever. But the great thing that I learned from whatever little I read was that you have to make a choice. It's your life. You have to decide, and you are responsible for what happens. That's the key difference I find, that you know the Western philosophers and others always told you this is the right way, this is logical, you know, there is only one God. I mean, there's all these prescriptions which have no basis in it. You know, if you look at it objectively, so you decide, okay, if you think there is only one God, fine. If you think there are 10 gods, fine. I mean, there's nothing, you know, there's nothing unscientific about it or scientific about it either way. So thank you very much. Yeah, I found that very interesting. And I'll hand it over to Charan to conclude the session. And
So I must thank the chairman. He's just come after a long journey and still chaired the session. Thanking him. I want to thank both the speakers, whom I had just a glimpse of listening to them earlier, and I found them so interesting that I thought they need to come and speak on our forum because we are a policy-oriented research think tank. And what both of you have presented is wealth of policy knowledge that should go into policy making. Like Dr. Panchamukhi, you're so experienced, senior, older than all of us, and I agree with every observation that you made. That if they understood what the Vedas say, maybe our country will be corruption free. And maybe, as in modern times, Professor Deodhar said, the pay commissions should weigh many things and have multiple scales in it to honor and respect specialization. So I think both of you have brought so beautiful things for policymakers. I'm going to specially send it to as many policymaker friends that I have when the recording is available tomorrow. And I'm going to urge both of you and others who are listening that if we can all listen to this, the wealth of knowledge that our Indian literature has, and if some one of us, I'm too old, but if young people can bring this to the world and get it published in various international journals to tell them that your economic model has led to climate change and global warming. And here is India, 3,000 years at the peak, and everything was so beautiful. The flowers were contributing to honey, but they were also contributing to a much more flooded output in the next generation. So these sort of concepts where you only steal or take so little, but then you allow others to flourish. The savings which Dr. Panchmukhi, you skipped that slide where it said that you should save about one third of your income, and I was looking at the savings rate in India. It is, I think, less than one third of our income. And I was thinking, I never knew why we tend to save, but it is probably coming in our DNA that we all like to save and invest. I also like the 16-fold classification that Dr. Panchmukhi you gave and the 64 set of classification that Professor Deodhar you provided. We have so much richness in our literature. I wish some young mind starts writing in international journal of income and wealth, probably, and contribute that this is probably a model which the rest of the world should now try. We have tried the Mahalanobis model, we have tried the socialist model, we have tried the capitalist model. Maybe now we should try a sustainable Indian model and then see if the rest of the world makes the best of it. So I think it's a good time we had this seminar. I want to thank you. While we are exporting our vaccines, two of them, I think we need to export two of our best minds that we have discovered today on Indian thought. I will be sending to as many friends, and I'm going to request each one of you to just send it so that our school children, the foreign friends, the Indian friends learn from it. I have an important announcement to make. As I'm repeatedly saying that we are a research-based think tank, the country has been seized with the idea of cryptocurrency, not only today, but then since 2013. 2018, RBI came out with a circular, Supreme Court upturned that circular recently, and the parliament was expected to have a look at the bill which the government wanted to bring. Stephen Kachati, who was the chief economist at ECB, and who's a professor of economics, very well published author, books to his credit, will be here with us next Friday to speak about cryptocurrency. Professor Stephen Kachati will be speaking from 6:30 to 7:30 on cryptocurrency. We invited him specially because in our country the thought was that cryptocurrency should not be banned but regulated. And I thought at the Bank for International Settlement, which makes the Basel norms, which leads into all types of regulation, why not get their chief economist to come and speak to us? Professor Steve Kachati is now with Brandeis, and he's also working with the European Central Bank. So I thought we will get him and get his ideas. So I would welcome each one of you next Friday to attend the session on cryptocurrency on with Professor Stephen Kachati. With this, thanking all of you once again for today's participation, the speakers, the chairman, and people who ask the questions. See you soon next week. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Charan Singh, Dr. Virmani, and Dr. Deodhar. It was an enjoyable, very intellectually, very fertile evening. And I am sure as you called upon people to pick up the ideas and develop further, I want my 4x4 model to be developed and put into practice in the Planning Commission with Dr. Virmani's help, with the Niti Aayog now. Somewhere it should be put into practice. Similarly, Dr. Devdhar's 24 model option should be put into practice for, it's more of people shifting from one situation to the other, not by taxation, but by voluntary change of lifestyle and so on. So that is very fundamental in it. I'm glad you called upon the people. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Dr. Virmani, very nice of you, very crisp observations. And Dr. Deodhar, thank you.
Thanks, Professor Charan Singh, giving me this opportunity. Great to see Professor Virmani here in person, kind of. So thank you very much. And by the way, Stephen Sessetti was my professor in Ohio State.
Oh, wow.
And
Beautiful.
Professor Panchamukhi's brother was my professor in Gokhale Institute.
Oh, I should mention one thing here. We are at Egrow Foundation are very fortunate under the chairmanship of Dr. Virmani. We are doing a project for Niti Aayog India 2047.
Oh, I
And
see.
listening to both of you and with Dr. Virmani here, I'm sure your presentation will help us make our thoughts for India 2047.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That is, then our effort would be really fruitful.
Yes.
Otherwise, I have been giving such seminars many times, but unless it is followed, as you rightly said, Dr. Charan Singh, with your practical wisdom, unless these are followed up by younger minds and practical thinkers, they would be just seminar topics and nothing more. Thank you for this.
If we all make the effort and we publish and push these ideas into international journals, some of we are so much enamored with anything which is published in Boston or London. So I think only then Indians will begin to listen to it.
Yeah.
So I think we need to
You're right.
On 4th of February, I'm coming to IIC to give a talk on ancient gold policy and the current policy. I'm giving a paper.
You're doing it with IIC?
In IIC, but for the Gold Policy Center here in IIM Ahmedabad.
Oh, okay. Maybe we should connect and do it a joint with Egrow because our participants will also benefit.
Right.
But I'll talk to you offline and we'll figure it out.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Off the cuff remark, when I wrote about game theoretic model of tariff policy making in Indian Economic Journal, nobody took note of it. But when Harry Johnson wrote a letter on his own that I also wanted to do similar thing, then I showed this letter to Professor Lakdawala, Brahmananda, and then they said, "Oh, is it so good article?" That is how we get our recognitions only when some outsider tells something that it is good. That is the tendency, mentality which is still there has to go, and then only we will be able to stand on our own intellectual footing. Thank you.
I'll just close here, but Professor Deodhar, I should mention this to you in presence of Dr. Panchmukhi. You know, we are the largest consumer of gold on the planet.
Yes.
But all the gold sold in India, in Delhi, is sold under London bullion standard even today.
Oh
Can you imagine this?
This Diwali.
If we call it the Mumbai bullion standard, nobody will like to even consider it. Moment we say LBS itself, that is the state of our slavery. You were saying that India was never a slavery state. I wanted to point it out to you. Since I have taken birth, I have never been out of the slavery state. Means every time I look at some standard, oh, this came from them. And when I was in Washington and I saw how George Washington used to treat the slaves in his own residential area, and I was thinking, look, what a strange state of affairs. And we still believe they are the best and we are the worst. We never had slaves. And today you clarified so well that Varna was never birth-based.
Yeah.
Which has been propagated around the world, that
Yes.
India's caste system is birth-based.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
think
yeah,
we
yeah.
need to spread the truth amongst ourselves
Yeah,
and
that-
then to the rest of the world.
yeah.
True.
Thank
All
you.
right. Let me conclude here once again. The recording will be available by noon tomorrow. We'll put it on our website and we'll also share with some
So
of
nice.
you
So
as
nice.
important participants. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye now.
Thank you. God bless you. Namaskar.